Thanks, Ian. All right, thanks for joining, everyone. This is the Building Decarbonization Committee of the Eugene Sustainability Commission. So last time we met, we talked with Faith Grant, is it right? Faith, I think it's Grant, and Ryan Sheehy. Graham, thank you. Got a couple of thoughts and ideas on split incentives, and the purpose of today's call is to try to think about what we might be able to recommend to City Council or put in our report, which goes to the main commission and then presumably on to Council. So I've got some content drafted as promised, and I was hoping I could show you what I've got put down on paper, and we can talk through. Ian, I'm really glad you're here because you're probably best positioned to say, hey, great idea, or that's pie in the sky, or interesting idea, what about this thing, right? From the city staff point of view, because you've been doing a lot of work on this. So without further ado, let me get this in the right place. And I'm actually going to start with a quick look at our what's the word, our committee proposal. So here's our committee proposal. In case it's helpful to see, I've put in some of this into the actual doc, but we said we're going to work on 2 focus areas. Split incentives is this today. And the idea is research current stuff out there in the world, find some examples, invite some subject matter experts, talk to people, and then eventually develop a report. And this is the part I put in here, develop the report that summarizes issues, blah, blah, blah. Eventually that becomes a memo. Just as a reminder of where we came from. So to share what I've actually been working on, and before I start, if anyone's got anything they want to flag, great. Don't be shy. All right. So here I started putting together a little report draft. This is intended to be that informational report, right? Brief context. This is more to what was the committee proposal. And then I basically just dive straight into some potential opportunities. And there's 2 big sections. I've done more development on the policy and program opportunity areas. And then there's a little section on like, how the heck do you pay for this stuff? Because in a large, I don't know if large is the word, but a multi-million-dollar budget deficit situation, big fancy shiny programs that cost a lot of money are gonna be hard to justify, even if they do help disadvantaged community members and advance decarbonization, among the other benefits, right? So there's a little bit on that. I haven't gotten as far down that road, but maybe I can run through a couple of these thoughts. The first 2 you'll see are really just stubs. The rest of them are all more built out, so we're starting from the stubs. But I did want to see, Ian, if you think we should be getting into BPS in this, given where it's at statewide.
I mean, I think surfacing it is good. I think every time people become more aware of this, it's actually helpful. I think probably where the city, from a staff perspective, where the city is I think we want to kind of see, I think we assume it's going to be very similar to the Washington rules, but I think we want to see what Odo actually does with these and then figure out like what maybe isn't covered there. I think the other potential opportunity is, I think as we talked about with the call with Elevate and fleets is, there's a parallel incentive split that exists in the commercial market as well. And so are there opportunities under BPS to support that in some way, shape, or form?
Okay. I'll put a little bit of stuff together. I think it's probably going to be, my thinking on this right now is it makes more sense to sort of, like you're saying, to surface it and say, here's where things sit in the process in terms of rollout. Building performance standards can, like my perspective on this is a BPS can drive a landlord to take action because they have to, right? It's like it's a regulatory requirement, or maybe there's a fine if you don't. The first step is the reporting, which is kind of the second piece in here, number two. This energy disclosure, which could be useful for renters seeking to rent places that don't cost a lot of money, overall total, right? Because that is your total cost of housing includes energy and water. So that's another piece, but I thought it was closely aligned with the BPS. So I also wanted to, before I started writing, I wanted to run that by the folks here.
Well, I guess so. Let's see. From my understanding of what Odo is doing on BPS is that any multifamily residential is going to be in that second tier. So all they're having to do right now at the state level is benchmark. So they're not going to be subject to any type of standard right now because Odo needs data to figure out what's going to happen next.
Yeah. What about so single family, there's point of sale requirements that exist in Portland, for example. It's not energy per square foot, it's a home energy performance score. So the 1 through 10. Where's Eugene at on something along those lines? What's the history on that?
I mean, it's been discussed for a very long time, predating me and predating Chelsea in this role. So it's been discussed for a very long time. I think, as I understand it, largely because, so two things. One, I think maybe lacking kind of federal DOE standards on this for rental properties. As I understood it, that had been one potential obstacle. And kind of as a gap for that then, kind of the city in partnership with eWeb and U of O had stood up the SCORE program that they do, which is really focused on doing this for rental properties. But in terms of a disclosure requirement for rental properties, that is something the city has considered, but has never actually pulled the trigger on.
Okay.
And I know kind of the new thinking from my understanding of talking to some folks is rolling out like point of sale and rental at the same time. You know, I know that some folks have discussed doing that and if there might be efficiencies of doing that. The city hasn't thought about that yet, but I know that's been discussed as a policy option.
What do you think would be helpful to put in this report given that it's sort of a first place to look?
Has this been done anywhere that you're aware of? The rental disclosure? I know like Portland, Bend, Hillsborough, et cetera, Milwaukee have theirs. For point of sale, has anybody done rental?
I don't know that people have done rental. I'll have to look into it more. I'm curious to know. Aaron, do you know anything like that? I mean, you're pretty focused on St. Vinny's, but
Yeah, I don't know of any examples. The thing I would throw in here on this one is if this is something we're going to put in here, I definitely would want acknowledged the challenges around collecting this data for a landowner, a landlord on behalf of tenants and the time that takes.
And because of permissions, especially energy.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking about. Yep.
Yeah, landlords can get energy data, like eWeb does I believe that there's a pathway to do that via eWeb.
Yeah, and I've had some success property wide, but when you get down to unit for unit and what scores are and how things might be performing, it's challenging to get to that level of detail.
Is it a privacy issue? Is it a data granularity issue?
Yeah, it's a privacy issue.
Privacy, okay.
I mean, maybe one thing that this could say is, because this paper is all about what the city might be able to do to help move this thing forward. And one thing we might be able to say is, if you could dedicate some staff time to someone who can help, if eWeb indeed can share tenant data with a landlord, they could say, here's your anonymized data for all these meters across the last 5 years. Here's your average, something along those lines, so that you could say, okay, I got my data, and it wouldn't be a big reporting burden where you go have to ask every single tenant of the building, assuming that's possible. It's basically a city facilitation role. You've got a policy, and we're going to help you fulfill it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I don't know where those rules come from around privacy and sharing that, if that's a utility by utility or if it comes from somewhere else, but yeah, it would be helpful.
I think, Aaron, the PUC drives some of that. I think it's a state reg that drives some of that. And then there's individual policies that different utilities have different requirements.
And I will say eWeb has been super helpful at an address at a property level, providing data. It's just the detail piece.
And to me, the other potential limitation here, as I understand it, although Laura, you've looked at this, you may have a better sense, is if you are a landlord as opposed to an owner-occupied property, you can't take advantage of the federal tax credit for this. So it's $150, but like that adds up. And so again, go back to your previous point, Alexia, how does this get paid for? Like, where does that get born?
The $150 tax credit for energy tracking?
Yes, no, so under IRA, you can actually, if you have a certified person do it, you can actually deduct the cost of a home energy score from your taxes.
Yeah.
But I believe that's only for owner occupied units. I'd have to go back and look at that language.
Yep. Right. So
that seems to be where a lot of that stuff falls, is for owner occupied versus.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, speaking of, it was quite apparent in eWeb's presentation, or as I was looking at rebates before eWeb presented, that every rebate is lower for renter properties than owner, presumably because they're not as sticky, or they're not as reliably sticky. As in 5 years later, eWeb's not quite as sure they're going to have those savings. So that's my guess. That's my read. But it did look like surely there was some decision making going on to set those rebate levels. I wasn't in the room. Anything else on these first two? Okay.
Sorry, just on the building performance standard thing, Alexei, were you thinking more of like the HART standard that Portland had been pursuing, or literally like what the state is doing?
That's a good question. There's going to be what the state is doing. The HART standard was pretty ambitious.
And it was explicitly a multi-unit family.
Yep. Explicitly multifamily housing, and covers more than just energy, but it's also kind of on pause right now. I think they're sorting out some of the details. And I don't know if you're in communication with Vin Mason.
Yeah, we talk every couple of months.
Great. Yeah. Vin is a great resource. He's been doing this for a long time, super knowledgeable.
Yeah, no, I lean on Vin a lot.
Yeah. Glad to hear it. So I think what I was thinking on a BPS is, given that this is a policy recommendation kind of a paper, or at least consideration kind of paper, to say there's going to be this statewide BPS, here's where we expect things are going to land in Eugene. These are a couple things that could be options to do more than just the state BPS, like you're saying with that second tier, where all we've got is benchmarking. It might make sense to let the state BPS roll out and then be able to build on top of it to say, hey, now we've got some data. Let's maybe we set a different tier within Eugene that has some more to it. And there's some you know, that could be, we could be talking, maybe there's a secondary component of the BPS in Eugene that is emissions oriented instead of just energy oriented. We translate energy into emissions, and have that, because that can encourage people to directly reduce emissions, like electrification, when we have such clean electricity. That energy efficiency targets don't quite do that. So I was thinking we basically say big changes happening in BPS space. There's going to be a statewide one. Here are a couple things that can build on top of a statewide BPS. HART is an example, except it's a little bit in flux because it's hard to do all that stuff.
Got it. Okay.
But I would absolutely welcome revisions and thoughts, especially on the BPS piece, because I'm a little bit farther from that in my day-to-day. Okay. Yeah, so let me draft
So
some.
sorry to go back to that. So Aaron, in your previous job, Good Company had done an energy benchmarking white paper for the city. Were you involved in that?
A little bit, yep.
Okay. That was kind of the precursor to this. And that's kind of where the city was. And eventually, Earth Advantage will negotiate their contract with the Federal Department of Energy on RECI, and we'll get that going, and there'll be a little bit of money to support this from a benchmarking perspective, I'm hoping.
I need to step away just for a moment. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry about that alarm going off here, and we had some strange things happen here last week. So just wanted to make sure everybody wasn't running out of the building.
Sure. Okay, so then I had a couple more things that I had dreamed up. One is, Ian, this is no surprise to you because I've been beating this drum for a while, and actually so have you. But the coordination role for building retrofits. When we're talking about split and set, like that's just a thing that we need in general, because these projects are so flippin' hard to get done. You've got like plumbers and electricians and contractors and solar bids and who knows, and it's like a bunch of stuff, and getting all the ducks in a row is hard. Hey Dennis, welcome. So just a quick note for Dennis. I reviewed the scope, like proposal for this committee, and then I've got this paper that I put some content into as a draft memo that covers a little bit of context and then goes straight into some possible policy and program opportunities for the split incentive, specifically that the city of Eugene might have some capacity to do something with.
I heard a little bit of it, but I had trouble getting in as a panelist. So I was there before you saw me. So at any
Okay.
rate, but I'm here. So I've heard part of what's been going on, but
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So we've gone through the first couple of ideas with some conversation, and then I was just going to start talking through a little bit of this. So number 3 here is the program facilitator role, where you've got some organization or city office or person somehow who is going to help people out, get projects planned, financed, get the work done, make sure it's done right, get the paperwork done to make sure you get all your incentives and credits, and make sure that people are happy with the results that they come out with. Given the complexity of whole building decarb projects, even in single family homes, let alone commercial and multifamily, it's daunting for cases not in the split incentive. It's more daunting when you have that split incentive, because why would you bother? So I was proposing that having that facilitator role is important just in general for folks not in the split incentive situation, but Um, pairing that hand-holding role with incentivization on landlords to get these projects done for both multifamily low-income tenant or multi or single-family low-income tenants and commercial spaces that are sort of community-oriented, you might say, right? CBOs and nonprofits. That might be a helpful city capacity there. Any direct
So,
thoughts?
Alexi, you're describing sort of a staff coordination role to help get this done. Is that what you're describing for large scale, deep retrofit kind of projects?
Yeah, I'm basically describing a coordination role. It could be done by city staff. I think more often it is done by an organization that the city contracts with to be the facilitator for these projects. And they don't have to be a deep, intense project every time, but often the idea is to enable people to be holistic about, oh, I'm interested in decarbonizing, like using my own house, for example. I'd like to get off the gas furnace that I've been using and get an electric heat pump. It would make sense to have my home insulated, but there's knob and tube wiring in the walls. So first I had to remediate the knob and tube wiring, check the electrical panel, make sure it's got capacity. Then I can go get the heat pump. Then I can insulate the walls. But if I insulate the walls first, I don't get the I would have the Northwest National, not the eWeb rebates, which are different and lower. So, you're like following these like trails. If you do it right, you may get a better result and you probably get more of the credits and incentives. But if you aren't savvy enough to follow all those pieces, and maybe you're unaware about insulating over knob and tube, and that doesn't come up until the insulation crew shows up and then they says they can't do their job. So, it's like having somebody who has the savvy about the financial stuff as well as how these projects work is pretty valuable. And when you're dealing with a split incentive situation, that extra layer is just going to stop landlords from moving.
Yeah, the little bit of anecdotal feedback we've gotten in engagement from some of the landlords we've spoken with is they're interested in what they could take advantage of, they would, but it has to be easy for them. Yeah. Otherwise, they're not going to do it.
Right. So this is like the make it easy coordination role. It could be city staff. It could be an organization that specializes in this, and those do exist.
So where we may be headed may be that the commission is making a specific recommendation for program management in order to maximize capacity to funding and to minimize barriers for would-be users, residential or landlords. Is that kind of where we're going to in terms of what this is all moving toward, is perhaps a specific recommendation from the commission to support that approach?
Yep.
But that way,
I think that's a good way.
yeah. Right. So that what we go to is, we kind of outline the different, points you're bringing, but we're really headed towards a final recommendation for staff to make this doable.
Yeah, Ian, how would that work at the city from your perspective? What do you think we should recommend is really what I mean for city to actually do it?
Honestly, as I've thought about this, I've thought about a bunch of different ways of doing it. And I don't think there's a right way. I think it's more like how the mechanism addresses the issue, I think is actually more important to me than like what the specific mechanism is. So like this is how, this is how the program navigator could be used to help address the split incentive. I think that's actually more useful than like what the exact nature of it might be. Because, we don't have a budget right now, but conceivably this could be a staff person. I think I had envisioned more of doing it. We have a model for that because our rental protection program has an internal staff person who is the navigator for that. So we do have an internal model for that in a couple of different places. I know of cities and where this happens, where they kind of have that internal model. But I think also, if you look at, if you want to scale this, it probably does make sense to outsource it. And so whether it's the energy project or Black Power or whomever it might be, elevate, that's probably where I'm leaning to do something like that, just to have somebody who can just be there and be that person to do the handholding. So like to me, it's more just how that could support the goal is probably as a mechanism, and then we can figure out the details of how that might look next, because maybe the budget situation changes at some point in the future, and it might make sense to pull this inside the city. But I think probably initially to set up the infrastructure, probably makes sense to bring in somebody who knows what they're doing to help do it. So we're doing it at a scale that helps and makes it kind of builds that foundation we can build upon.
Do you recommend for or against including examples of companies that do this?
I'm for it, and I think and I think particularly focusing on rentals, like I know Faith has done a lot of work in the multi-unit rental market in Portland. Community Energy Project has done a lot of work under Climate Community Energy Fund. I think that would be helpful, to do, and even like an anecdote or a city, like Company X is doing a project in City Y, as that's known, would be helpful, just as examples.
Something like that then. I don't want to be seen as recommending companies, but if there are several that do this, that might help make it a little more real.
You've got enough of them on the list. You're not making a specific recommendation. You've got examples, and I just think we may want to get to, a very clear recommendation, not within the body of the report. I'm feeling a little frustrated with council this week when we just, I'm trying to get the report that the commission already did on offsets that Zelenka asked us to do to Zelenka. And it's a May 22 report. So I don't trust them to read the whole thing.
Sure.
So I think we need to kind of like bold whatever our recommendation is. And then encourage them to read the whole thing.
Yep. Okay. Also, if any of these are like, hey, that's a great idea, but it's never going to happen, then maybe we put that at the end, or de-emphasize or cut it entirely. That's okay too. To maintain focus on actionable stuff. All right. I can do a little bit of light lift, but I think this is a pretty light lift here since it seems like pretty close. Should we go to 4? Okay. So this idea was basically bulk purchasing of key equipment. And one example is up in Portland, funded, of course, by the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which is a huge pot of money. So they have the ability to do cool stuff with it. Slowly. They're rolling out thousands of portable heat pumps so that people who have no access to cooling can have cooling during, summer heat emergencies. But they are high efficiency heat pump units. They're both rolling, like portable things, those things that look like the Dalek, and the saddle heat pump units that replace a window air conditioner. So there's a couple different styles. These things are there's similar programs. New York City has been doing this kind of bulk purchasing for a long time. I think it was New York City Affordable Housing, whatever that bureau is called, that is sort of responsible for making refrigerators get 2, 3, 4 times more efficient over the last couple decades. Because they said, if you make a Wave-It refrigerator, we'll buy a lot of them. And the market responded. We are not the size of New York City, sure, of course. But these bulk purchase agreements are out there in the world. Lets you buy a whole bunch of them relatively cheap. And then there's a direct install program where they go out to eligible households. So that goes right past the split incentive barrier, right? Because there's no Often with direct install programs, there's no upfront cost. It's not necessarily, doesn't have to be free. So that may be a possibility. These being portable units is an important part of the Portland's approach that Earth Advantage is running. That heat response program they link because they have the potential to stay with the low income tenant as opposed to the property where they're installed in a fixed way, which is kind of unusual in an efficiency program. Usually they want stuff that is firmly attached so that it stays with the building. But a direct install program doesn't have to be portable stuff. That's a little unusual. So I only put one example here. I think there might be a couple ways to do this. But this one comes with more of an upfront cost, because if you're going to bulk purchase stuff, you have to cut a big check to buy a bunch of it.
Right, right, and that's the big barrier is, like you said, the Portland Energy Fund, we don't have an equivalent funding. So, it may be, we look at some of these in terms of some immediate response, like I think the program support is something that's a high priority, but other options to explore as additional funding sources might become available. So I'm just wondering if we might end up with a sub list, because this one seems a hard one to do unless you've got a chunk of funding.
I think my thought on this, Alexia, is like, I think just identifying that the source of funding comes from Portland Clean Energy PSF would be helpful for something like this, just as like, that's always helpful. Like how did resources get raised during this? Is it a grant? Is it from this other program? I think that's useful information as, we're in the middle of talking about the budget right now. We just had a meeting with council on Monday about this. So that's always helpful to understand where the money's coming from.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, and that's, there's a section at the bottom where I think we may want to mention what PSEF is and how that went. It's certainly brought in more funding than anyone expected, I think, in Portland. But this also could be a public-private partnership, this direct install program. We could see about federal grants, because those can also exist for these kinds of things.
That's basically what Ballpark does, right? It's basically decarbonization as a service. So they own the infrastructure, and then they give it to people, or they lease it to folks, right? Isn't that their model?
Yeah, and there's some interesting stuff like Vermont Gas, which is a gas utility, owns heat pump water heaters, electric heat pump water heaters. They lease them to people, but they maintain ownership of that water heater. They replace the gas unit with their own heat pump water heater, so you don't have to pay an upfront cost, but you get to electrify. And then the gas company has a business model that is not selling molecules, which is really neat. I don't think Northwest Natural is picking it up quite yet, but it's interesting to see. That is a no upfront cost option, which is why I mentioned in the context of the split incentive here. It's not in this paper, but it's kind of cool. That's not a city option, that's a utility program that the city doesn't really have much. I suppose the city and Northwest Natural are engaged in conversations, but they're sometimes a little adversarial. So anyway, okay. I will build this out a little bit. Dennis, I'm open to putting it into round 2. And as soon as we're done here, I'll get this up on like a Google Doc so people can mess with it before we, so we can have a round 2, clean it up next meeting and get it back to the commission.
The windowsill ones, is that the gradient, or is that something different?
Yeah, there's 2. There's the Gradient and one other company that I don't remember. wind cost in. Okay, yeah. I'll see if I can't get those linked. Okay. Anything else? Any other thoughts on this thing? It's a pretty straightforward concept, but it comes with upfront cost. So it might be a pilot, for example. I mean, St. Vinny's might be a good pilot opportunity there for a direct install program. That's certainly in the realm of what St. Vinny's has done in the past. You know, get things in places that need them.
Yeah, I mean, the way we're approaching this now is, you know, we're utilizing still utilizing Odo rental heat pump funds and combining with utilities. I'm working on 2 properties right now. We've done 3 so far. This would be interesting, those upfront costs though, and where that money comes from. You know, certainly we would want to participate in something like this, but those upfront funds are challenging.
And does it feel reasonable that, you know, local, to put in a line that says, you know, local nonprofits, for example, St. Benedict's, have expressed interest in participating in such programs? Do you think we could say that?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I know folks would be all about it here if the units were available to get out to people. Absolutely.
Yeah, if we give council an implementation pathway, a little bit about what's possible and what's real, I think that's helpful.
And I don't know, Lexi, have you talked to Esteban about this at all? Or Aaron, have you?
About this sort of program
This sort of
locally,
idea, yeah, some sort of,
I
well,
haven't talked
purchase.
to, I haven't talked to him about this because again, right, it's where's the pool of money
Where's the money
to,
coming from? Yep,
yeah.
okay.
And you know, we'd also be in, right, if there's some sort of partner grant opportunity that we could participate in and get on board with, certainly would be all about that as well. Just haven't seen the path or the group coming together around it yet.
Got it, yeah. No, the one thought would be, would this be something that would be maybe part of a larger community change grant idea?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that would be great. We've definitely, I've been poking around opportunities related to that. I've been focused in on manufactured housing and is there a way to use that grant opportunity to get rid of some of the really old and really inefficient ones locally. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be a great idea as well. I mean, that grant seems like an amazing opportunity. And I know Lane County has already put in an application, but I don't think there's anything that would preclude our community from doing more on that front.
Was that, am I characterizing that right? A broader partner community change grant proposal? Did I get the words right?
Yeah, that sounds great to me.
Okay. One thing that Ryan from Fleet Development out in Enterprise flagged after our conversation, he said, "Oh, by the way, I just thought of this thing." Was that so? He's been thinking about things. I'm on to number 5, by the way. He's been thinking about how to advance solar energy in buildings that have a split incentive, very similar to efficiency. Solar's quite predictable in terms of the income stream, right? Like, you know how many electrons are going to come off it on average, more or less. And you know the value of that. And so he was interested in seeing, he's been noodling on the idea of policies that encourage landlords to pay the energy for their tenants, ideally with some kind of safeguard to make sure rent doesn't go out of control afterward. Although I think there's some market forces that help that not happen, since rent is often more obvious to folks than utility costs. But you know, maybe some policy safeguards there, but basically to encourage, to provide some kind of a temporary tax deferral or holiday or something, you know, tax discount that would go to landlords who take on those energy costs. And perhaps there's a requirement that they then get an energy audit and do the stuff that do some or all of the stuff that's recommended in the audit. You can see that my writing didn't quite get finished here, looking at this chaotic text here, but I think you get the basic idea. To encourage property owners to take on energy bills, which then clears out the split incentive as an issue for that property.
So, sorry, just, I want to be clear, I'm understanding this, Alexi. So this is take on, so if you have if you're a landlord in a single family detached home, right now, I'm not aware of anybody who doesn't have their tenant pay that bill. So they would be paying that, folding that into the total rents.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily need to be single family detached. It's more common that energy is covered in commercial, for example. But if
Yeah,
a landlord whose tenant pays their own energy bill, if the tenant does not pay their energy bill, you have a disincentive to conserve, which is a bad thing. However, it gets rid of the split incentive. So I don't know that it's my very favorite option because of that flowing both ways thing, but it does knock down the split incentive barrier because now you have the landlord paying for the energy.
okay.
There's a, what Ryan was saying is if there's some way to put an incentive in place so that landlords cover the energy cost, then they have the incentive to invest. And if it were paired with an energy audit and taking some kind of action on the energy audit, it might end up having the desired effect of reducing energy use.
So I think this is an interesting idea. I think the challenge in Eugene is that, so again, anecdotally, what we've heard from engagement is, you know, for landlords who have detached single family homes, they are often, the responsibility of the bill is on the tenants. But if you go to duplexes, fourplexes, just because of how many of those are metered, it's often like a single meter for that building, and therefore the landlord basically covers that cost. But we have a lot of single family detached rentals in this community because that's a big part of our residential building stock. And so that feels like I don't know if it's a gap, but that feels like an area where this would need to be, something might have to change. And I don't know what that is yet, to speak to kind of the fact that, you know, 53% of our housing stock is rental. A huge part of our housing stock is single family detached, just in terms of pure numbers. And so like that's the building stock that's going to have a lot of low income renters in it. But there's probably that, you know, but that energy cost is probably being borne by the tenant.
Yeah.
And I don't have good data of that breakdown other than this is very high level, and you know, we could probably get that, but I just know that like a huge part of our building stock for residential is just single family or manufactured housing on the opposite end of the spectrum. And there's very little right now that's multi-unit, and a lot of the multi-unit is newer.
Right. Yeah, and or student oriented.
Yeah.
So in this case, to be making a big splash, we would be wanting to talk, we'd want to be focusing on single family detached rental homes, like you're saying, just rephrasing here.
I think we have to make sure that we speak to that in some way because that's going to be a lot of the stock. Yeah.
Right. If we miss that, we've missed most of the point. So from a landlord's point of view, there might be a disincentive to do this. Not only are you going to be on the hook for energy bills, which is a new cost, but also when you list a property, you list how much it rents for. We don't generally list how much the utilities cost. It's a little bit more behind the scenes. So the upfront price, folks are gonna sort rentals by how much rent is, not by how much total cost of housing is. So if this is covered in rent explicitly, there's a disincentive to a landlord to do this because their rents are gonna look higher. So maybe there's a way to call that, a utility fee, or somehow put that in a place that is somewhat different from rent. It's still a portion of the total cost of housing because that money is getting paid and it's coming from the tenant in the end. But I think there's some consideration to do on how to set that up to actually work. I'm not sure I know the answer.
I think going back to Dennis's tiered idea, I think this is an interesting idea. I'm not sure what it means yet from a policy perspective.
Yep. Okay. I'm happy to make this tier 2.
Well, and part of what we might want to do is take forward the notion that exploring some of these items that we make a tier 2 into the next work plan, so we can, do a little more digging and ponder a little more deeply.
Yep. And I don't know that anyone has actually done this. Ryan was saying this would be an interesting idea. It's a barrier I've found. I wonder if this could work. He did not say we're doing this in Joseph or something like that, right? So it might just be a curveball. I got 2 other things here that I wanted to cover. These are both pretty established pathways. Property assessed clean energy. There's commercial CPACE and residential PACE. This is basically you set up a district, a taxation or assessment district, where property owners can voluntarily finance investments in energy efficiency or electrification, renewable energy, on their property. And instead of paying for it up front, they get an assessment on their property taxes, basically. So they now pay more in tax, and ideally that's offset by energy savings or for renewable generation. I'm not sure what the landscape is on city-county collaboration on this kind of thing, since property taxes are generally county, but maybe there's a city way to do that. There are, I don't know, a dozen or so places in the country that are doing residential PACE, and I think there are more that are doing commercial PACE. So there's this exists out there in the world. Ian, has a city done anything poked at this at all?
On the commercial side, but probably looking, because I think like all the counties up north, right, Clackamas, Multnomah do it at the county, and like the Shoots has a county level CPAS program. So I think the conversations has been with the county to figure out if there's something that would make sense at the county level. I know some of the community development folks have done that. So that's probably where the city's been thinking about this. I know it came up in our decarb report that Good Company did for the city a couple of years ago. I think again the issue is like, how do you fund it initially? Like, where's the money come from to initially fund a program like this?
Yep.
I definitely had a question on residential PACE because my information may be dated, but my understanding is some jurisdictions had stopped doing that just because of high default rates and some issues with, it's a lien against your house. And if you're not getting and this goes back to the other part of this we talked about, which is the energy performance gap. If you're not getting the savings that you hoped, and you're basically getting that once a year hit to your tax bill, some people have been defaulting on that, and that has created some problems. That would be my biggest concern on the residential side, whereas in the MUSH market, like there's much more stability there.
Yeah.
But better understanding the residential, like who's doing it and how it's worked, would be helpful. That makes me a little bit leery on the residential side right now, but commercial PACE, I think, makes a lot of sense if we can figure out how to fund it.
Yeah, and I think that this has been done in other places through a municipal bond for the upfront cost, with the repayments on that bond coming out of the property tax payments, for example. So city floats money up front, it goes into the account, and then you repay it over time with participation checks. But if they default, then you're stuck, right? Because if you have a high default rate, you still got to pay your bond back, but you're not getting property taxes coming in to do it. So that's where the default is a problem. So it makes sense to think about maybe starting this in a pilot approach if we're thinking CPACE potentially. So I'll look a little bit and figure out if I can find examples, or if others can. Great. Every time I say I mean we, but if you guys don't, I will. Okay, and then the
That's
last
because you know where to look.
right. Yep. The last one was on-bill financing. And EWEB does zero interest loans. So it's not, and I don't know how they finance those loans, like where they're tied. I suspect they may be, I don't know if they're on bill or not, actually. I do know that EWEB does those zero interest loans, and they're generally income limited. For both water and energy projects, actually. Leak repair is one thing that that does exist. But that's a place where we might want to consider, if you're income eligible for an EWEB zero interest loan, then you can get on-bill financing to pursue these energy investments. One question is how it stays with the property over time. And I don't know exactly how that's often done. I'm not an expert in on-bill financing.
Yeah, and the cities talk to EWEB and U of O about this because this is often offered as an option when they do the home energy score for renters. They talk about this. Matt Lutter's the guy at EWEB who handles most of this. I don't know they've had a lot of uptake of this for doing that, but they do offer it, and they have tried to talk about people for doing this. I think it goes back to, particularly for low income, if you're barely making ends meet to pay your bill anyways, that if you're adding additional cost to that. So, I think it's an interesting idea. I just don't know what their uptake has been for that. And if this speaks to the low income marketplace in a way that's actually helpful and is going to create change. That's a question I have. I don't have good data to answer on that. But my sense from Matt was that their uptake has been pretty low for people, but they've identified trying to maybe, keep it, tie the account to the address rather than the actual tenant or bill payer. And, whether they can do that within their systems is something I'm not totally clear on.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here to, say something about assuring that owners and residents are knowledgeable and can access such programs. Is one argument more for program management.
That's exactly right, too, Dennis.
That broader piece is, we went out and took the little educational piece on the road, and the questions weren't about the commission. The questions was how do people get more information about what programs are possible. And so I think that's one of the key things every time we have an opportunity to bring that up. People can't access programs they don't know about.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of this is just the general awareness there, Dennis. I think that's a good point.
Okay.
The other thing that has just come up, and this is kind of for EWEB more than the city, but I think I've been thinking about this as a city program is, for folks who've been here a while and maybe have rented in the past, my understanding is EWEB used to have like a renter starter kit that was just like a lot of do-it-yourself weatherization things that they could do.
Those.
And they don't do that anymore for some reason, but one of the activities that we've been doing at some of our tabling or we've been thinking about is doing like the door snakes that are kind of the draft stoppers. And that's been like a really popular idea for people of like, the ability to provide even do little simple things that they can do that are zero cost, low cost. It's not getting deep decarbonization, but like it's making little differences in things that people can do. And if there's a way to support that, do something with that, maybe a small thing that could be added to this.
What about partnering with like Home Depot and Lowe's and Jerry's, and because they do free classes on different things, if they could kind of target their classes on this type of home improvement, that could be something to like tap into what's already happening out there.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And bring. They would be all,
Yes, bring. Cough, outreach committee, cough.
yep.
I know we're supposed to leave at 1 or end at 1, but I do have to leave like right away. So I wanted to mention you're going to put this in a Google Doc and we can go and kind of wordsmith. And one thing I was wondering about is like the concept of split incentive, I feel like is very jargony and it's like not really intuitive what it is. And so if we're wanting council to like hear kind of the content and not necessarily learn new terms, we might want to switch things around and just kind of embed that so they know that's what it's called, but maybe not have it be so prominent. And that's something I could try out and see what people think, just to kind of make it a little more easy read for them.
Yeah, and some examples wouldn't hurt a bit either, you know, to make this a little more
And
real.
maybe even a paraphrase, like, you know, it comes down to what's in it for me. Yeah. So,
Yep. Yep, that sounds good. Okay. So the rest of it was real basic. There's not much left to show, right? It's like, how the heck do we pay for this? And I didn't get very far on this, so I would really appreciate thoughts and ideas here, because there's, as far as I thought, you got bonds, like CPACE, and you got things like Portland Clean Energy Fund. But like I said, I probably spent 5 or 10 minutes writing this little section. So
you know, bonds aren't out of the picture. Zelenka has talked about floating a bond measure around, you know, climate issues. So
We could pull up because we did a report a couple years back on financing mechanisms. So
Yeah.
it's definitely outdated, but there might be something to pull from that.
I'll dig that up and pass it along to the folks on this committee.
okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you to all of you. Let's see, where's my stop? There's my stop share. That's what I got so far. I think I appreciate thoughts and improvements on it. I'll send out the Google Doc and we can start noodling on it.
Ian, while you're here, and if you're looking for the piece the commission did before on financing, I had done a separate across to Danielle to see if we could find the one we did on offsets. If you're looking anyway at past council stuff, I'm looking for the commission report on offsets. You're muted again.
Yep. So I think, yeah, she had mentioned something like that to me. I didn't know if that had been sent to you or not. The other thing, and I don't have it in front of me, but all of those old committee meetings are actually on YouTube, Dennis. So you can actually search Eugene Sustainability
It doesn't
Commission.
go back. It doesn't go back far enough to get me there, where I can
No, I think
access it.
no, I'm saying in YouTube. These are all of the committee meetings are actually.
Okay, I'll look and see if I can find the old ones on YouTube.
So I think
Okey-doke.
going back to I think Sam was doing that back in 2019, 2020. So I'm pretty sure some of those committee meetings are actually posted. I haven't looked carefully. I looked for other ones that were done around that time. There's a trees one that was done at the same time. But those should be live because our sort of public information policy is to post those to YouTube. So there's a guideline record of that. And that's kind of, in addition to the report, that's kind of the raw conversations that you can see of some of the stuff that Mitra brought up that were some of the challenges.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Okay, I have to run, but
Me too.
Likewise.
bye,
See you
everybody.
later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.